All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are just getting started today, so I'll give folks a few minutes to trickle in. But welcome, everyone, to the June Business of Alt Protein seminar. Hard to believe that we are halfway through 2023. Not sure if you saw the news, but Upside Foods and Good Meat both just received approval to sell their cultivated meat in the United States. So it's a big day for the industry. We're celebrating over here at GFI. We do just have I'll wait a few minutes for people to trickle in. In the meantime, I'd love to know where everyone is calling in from today. I am in New York right now. Normally I'm in San Francisco, but I'm on the East Coast. So if you want to type in the chat where you're calling in from, would love to see that. See that Jenny's calling in from Quebec, Ithaca, New York. I used to live in Ithaca, Chile. So we have some global folks, Italy, Portugal. Love to see the international crowd that we have here. Colorado, another Canadian. Welcome, everyone. So I guess we can go ahead and get started. So my name is Audrey Gear. I'm a startup innovation specialist at the Good Food Institute. And today's webinar is a bit of a departure from our typical seminar topics. So today we'll be learning all about opportunity thinking, which is a set of principles and processes that guide how to find, define, and capture opportunity, driving focus and innovation efforts. So in the seminar, we'll talk about the difference between ideas and opportunities, and we'll also give you some tools for how to think strategically about this at your own company. We have an hour and a half set aside for the seminar today, so we'll have a lot of time for Q&A at the very end. So just a little reminder to submit your questions, preferably in the Q&A box rather than the chat. That'll help us keep track of them, and we will go ahead and answer those questions at the end of the seminar. Before we get started, I do just want to introduce the work of GFI for anyone who isn't familiar. So we're an international nonprofit organization that is developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. So we identify the most effective solutions, we mobilize resources and talent, and we empower partners across the food system to make all proteins accessible, affordable, and of course, delicious. Secondly, the seminar will be recorded and we will be posting this to our YouTube channel. We'll be emailing all of you a copy of the recording and some resources. So if you missed something or want to revisit it, don't worry, we will be sending this to you so you can take a look at it. You can share it with other folks who will find it interesting. And third, for any of you that may have missed this announcement, GFI is bringing back the Good Food Conference. This will be held in San Francisco this September. We're going to bring together over 1,000 innovators, scientists, policymakers, industry leaders, global champions for alt proteins. It really is a can't miss conference for anyone devoted to the alt protein industry. I just want to remind you that early bird tickets are on sale right now, but that sale ends on June 30th. So please go ahead and get your tickets if you plan on attending. And again, please ask your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Pam Henderson. Pam is the CEO and the founder of NewEdge, and she has been involved in innovation and organizational growth for the past 25 years. Pam pioneered NewEdge's opportunity thinking approach. She has had faculty appointments at various universities and has worked with the U.S. National Lab System and venture capitalists to commercialize over 200 early stage technologies. So Pam will be sharing the fundamentals of opportunity thinking with us today. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Pam. Welcome.
Thank you. And I'm very excited about the good news you've shared. It's nice to start on that note. I know it's been tricky lately, so I'm super excited. And I'm very grateful, Audrey, for your help with this and for the Good Food Institute and for the 80 or so people that are joining us today. I'm just delighted. So I'm also joined by Brittany Kunkel. She's just been a phenomenal part of the NewEdge team over the years. And she kind of does everything. She makes the magic happen. She says she makes my dreams come true. I don't think she does all of my dreams, but she does actually quite a few. And usually, more importantly, the dreams of our clients. So So I am going to just jump in and just start sharing the screen here. I do really want you guys to ask questions and ask hard questions. We're not deep experts in alt protein. We've worked with a ton of clients in this space. You know your product categories better than we do. But what we know is we know how to help you move from a lot of times really brilliant ideas and sometimes even, technologies and so forth into really driving opportunities and getting where you want and getting consumers to eat this wonderful food and actually change how the world creates food in our food system. So let's get going. And I'm just going to jump in. So we've got the screen up. I think it's on us. So we'll show you the screen here in just a second. Okay. Can you guys see it? See the screen? Yeah. Okay, great. Audrey's good. We're good. Okay. So I'm going to get going. So the business of alt protein, myself and Brittany. Brittany, you've been here how long? 7 or 8 years?
Yeah, eight plus years now.
Okay. They're like dog years around here. So what we're going to talk about is thinking about opportunity, but not just thinking about opportunity, turn it into action. We really do want to see you all making money, changing the world, changing the food system. So we need to turn opportunity from just thinking about it, but into action. But it starts with how we think about it. We've worked with a ton of different companies, worked with a ton of companies in the food system, sometimes the big bad guys in the food system, sometimes the good guys in the food system. So you're going to see a lot of our food experience, and we've worked with 75 Fortune 500 clients, but really our base, while we started, as Audrey mentioned, of commercializing several hundred technologies. We have a cross-functional team that really brings together a wide variety of backgrounds, but most importantly, I think, is our ecosystem. So we have this really rich ecosystem of people in sensory, in technology. So we're really working with some of these amazing startups, but also with other advisors that are helping those startups succeed. And we've been around for 20 years. We're located in the Pacific Northwest, and we've got this beautiful building, the Opportunity Accelerator, and right in the middle of wine country, just an amazing place to be. So if you ever need a retreat, we're a great place to come. So I was a professor and had not intended to go over to the dark side, which is consulting, but I started working with the National Lab System on commercializing early stage technologies. And that really took me into an interesting space. And that was that what I found with these, oftentimes, these technologies were being spun out. We were trying to get investors and so forth. And oftentimes our founders were really passionate about the ideas, but weren't always clear about what the market opportunities were. And when asked about the market opportunities, those investor presentations and stuff would always fall back to just like numbers, like this is how big the market is. Okay. But numbers don't really tell us where the need is, why people are buying, and so forth. And so I found that there just wasn't a really good way to think about opportunity. And if you just go and you ask like 10 people, like, how do you define opportunity? I have asked ChatGPT. I think it copied my book. But that said, people have different definitions of opportunity. You'll see marketing people will talk about it more as like the market need. You'll have technology people talk more as the technology. You might have somebody talking about it as more as the money. And so if we can't even define opportunity in the same way, it's going to be really tough to talk about it in the same way. So we were really fortunate that some work that we were doing, we've worked with Mista for a long time from its early foundation, worked with Scott May there. And he then introduced us into Audrey and to Good Food Institute, and that's how this webinar has happened. So I'm going to turn it over to Brittany to tell kind of where we are. It's called a scary tale. Alt meat is not the scary tale, but just the journey of how long it takes to change the world and change how the world thinks. That's the hard part that we're all facing. And so I'm going to have Brittany maybe just tell a little bit of that story.
Yeah. So first of all, stepping back a little bit, we are here to hopefully tell you some principles that you can apply to your business. So it's going to be slightly different than maybe some of the webinars that you've seen before, but we will challenge you to leverage the tools and frameworks that we're explaining and sharing with you today to your own business. And we've found that it helps everyone from startups all the way to those Fortune 500s. So let's start with a little bit of a history lesson scary tale. So alt meat, that's kind of, we're in the alternative protein space, but kind of going back, 1931 was the very first product that was commercially available. And it was a soy and wheat-based fake meat or meat alternative, developed by a Seventh-day Adventist.
Which I just want to know, like even calling it fake meat, that's what they were referring to it then. Like that's how they were defining it. So I think even as we've progressed, that's a very kind of like old term that they're using. So that's why we're using that language then. And then as we see, that language starts to change in much healthier ways.
So 1931, I don't think anybody on this call was born then, but you might remember some of these other later editions. So in 1981, Garden Burger launches. It's kind of this first veggie burger patty that really is commercially viable. And then 1994, Quorn launched the first fungus-based meat alternative. So we're kind of seeing the shorter and shorter time frames. Then 2013 was the first lab-grown burger. The Dutch scientists figured it out, and it's hard to believe because that's, I mean, 10 years ago already. And then 2016 is when Impossible launched its alt burger with heme. So we're kind of seeing some, like the time frame kind of condensed between all of these different pieces. Yeah. And then where we are today. Today we've got everything from cellular-based companies. We've got those that are looking at alternative proteins like
Fungus,
yeah, mycelium. We've got things that are happening in fermentation. We've got so many things, but the landscape, and this is just like the tip of the iceberg of the landscape, is becoming saturated. Everybody's going towards that same market share. And so we're here to talk about, what can you do to kind of help differentiate. But I think the challenge here with this example is just the length of time in which we're kind of seeing that market penetration. And so what can we do to speed that up? So
yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit. It's interesting. So we're redoing, I wrote a book called You Can Kill an Idea, but You Can't Kill an Opportunity. And if you haven't ever gotten the book and you're interested, by all means, shoot us a note. We are sunsetting that with Wiley and starting we're revising it for Fast Company right now. So we may not have all the copies we need, but we will get you a copy of either the original or the revised. What's interesting in there is this tension. One of the things we talk about is the tension between fast and slow. And so what I mean by that is we all look outside into the world and we're like, oh my gosh, the world is moving so fast, right? It's just overwhelming how quickly things are changing. Alternatively, when you're inside a company and you're developing a technology, it can actually feel slow. Like it takes a lot of experimentation. It takes, we work with companies in packaging. It can take 9-10 years just to come with up a new packaging. It takes many, many years. And the problem with the slowness internally is you run out of money. And so there's just this really interesting conflict right now between fast and slow. And so we'll talk about that in a second here, but I do want to just give us also a little bit of hope that that slowness isn't unique to startups. So this example that I want to share is just a fun example of Post-it notes. And so we look at 3M, we think they're terribly successful. Well, the first Post-it note came from this guy making a mistake. So he had this adhesive that basically wasn't very good. It didn't stick very well. And all of a sudden he started thinking, well, this is kind of fun. I'm going to paste on some paper and just stick it in my hymn book, because he was in a choir. And he was like, that way I can just mark my pages without the little page markers falling out. So that was the origin. Well, it was actually quite a few years ago. And so over the course of like 15 years, they went from knowing about Post-it note and trying to get there to not ever being really able to get there until 15 years later. And so I wanted to just share that because it's a real challenge to develop technologies. And so if you are feeling that pressure of both the external speed, but the internal slowness, I want you to know that that is normal. And that is something that large companies are experiencing as well. And so one of the things that we want to talk about is this notion that, everybody looks for a big idea as that starting place for growth. But without that opportunity, it doesn't go anywhere. And that Post-it note story is interesting because they tried a lot of different places and they just couldn't quite figure out what was the opportunity. Like they put it on paper, but they put it on a lot of different things and just couldn't quite figure it out. So understanding, having a big idea is great, but we have to get to the big opportunity. So we're going to talk a little bit about ideas versus opportunities. So my first thing is to just talk about, like, what do we think of an idea? It's like something that we're going to make. Typically, the idea is, what are we going to make? And what I find, and what we found over the years, is inventors fall in love with their ideas. The problem is that those ideas exist in a sea of possible ideas. Now, those possible ideas might be from competitors, or it could be just even from your own head.
Yeah.
And for me, it's from my own head. And so the problem then is, well, where do I focus? How do I know this idea is better than any other idea? And that becomes a challenge, because I know I get very excited about my ideas. We all do. We didn't think of them for no reason at all. And so we get passionate about them. But the research actually shows that it takes 3,000 ideas to get to 100 projects, to get to 2 that go to market, to get to 1 that breaks even. So on the one hand, we need a lot of ideas to be able to make it through that gauntlet. We do need a lot of ideas. On the other hand, if we just look at ideas alone, they're kind of failing us, right? Because it would be good if we could get like better odds. And so when we look at the literature, there's a lot of literature on ideation. And there are strategy books that talk about opportunities, but there are a ton more that are about ideation and creative thinking. And when you look at them, a lot of them have, by the way, light bulbs on the covers, which I actually think they could get a little more creative about the cover of the book, but a lot of passion around ideas, and yet less clarity around what is that opportunity. And oftentimes people don't feel like they're really in love with the opportunity. They feel like they're more in love with the idea. So that's where I came up with this phrase of, you can kill an idea, but you can't kill an opportunity. And the notion of that, I learned that from working with the startups. And I thought when I went and started working with the Fortune 500s, they'd all be like, yeah, we know that. But actually it was worse, because there were more people with more ideas. And so we still see companies struggling with this. So our first question to you, and you are going to then be writing questions to us, is, has your company fallen in love with a specific idea? And really that underlying question is, you feel like that's kind of a problem? Do you feel like at times you've been tethered to an idea, maybe without understanding the broader opportunity? Now, I know we haven't really fully defined opportunity yet. We're going to get there in a second. So just, has your company fallen in love with the idea? And do you see that as helpful, or, maybe has that been challenging? It isn't that we don't love ideas. We do. They are the thing that actually ultimately turns into a product on a shelf. But we've got to make sure that we're anchoring that to the larger opportunity. So I'm going to have you talk a little bit about this.
So Pam already mentioned it. We're throwing out these words, right? Idea, opportunity, and a lot of times my idea of an idea and my definition of an opportunity is going to be very different than Pam's or anybody on this call. We all kind of approach it with our own singular definitions shaped by the years we've had on this earth and the things that have helped form us. So a challenge here really, and we see this in organizations large and small, is that people confuse ideas and opportunities, and they talk about them interchangeably. And so one of the first things that we find with organizations is that we need to kind of level set the knowledge across the organization and get everybody actually speaking the same language. Mm-hmm. So we're going to give some examples here, but I'm going to start with an analogy. So think of an idea like a koi fish. So some people say, if you take a koi fish and you put it in a small bowl, it will stay quite small. They sense their environment and they grow to the size that they can. Doesn't work for puppies, fish, or babies, unfortunately.
Don't stay small and cute.
As I'm learning. So if you think of an idea like a koi fish, and an opportunity would be the pond. So it will grow to the size. Your idea can only grow as big as the opportunity that exists in the market for it to flourish. So if you think of an idea like a koi fish and an opportunity is the pond, it stands to reason if you want a big fish, you really need to first find a big pond. So if you want a big idea, you have to really identify that big opportunity out in the market. So it's hard to kind of conceptualize this sometimes. So we're going to give you some examples in your industry and outside.
Yeah. So I want to start with just talking about a company, Motif. You guys may know know Motif. Motif is a very well-funded startup. And Motif started with a couple, they came out of Ginkgo Bio, and they started with a couple really cool ideas. And they were a lot about fermenting proteins that could be primarily ingredients. Okay, so that they would be ingredients into other foods. So it could be milk proteins, it could be heme, It could be a variety of different things, whether it's protein or something, adjacent. And they were very passionate about those individual proteins. Okay. Very convinced that those were going to really unlock things because, in the case of the dairy proteins, they're very scarce. It's hard to get them. It takes a lot to, kind of pull them out of cow's milk, and also it's cow's milk. So if we want to go vegan, or we want to go to expanding the supply chain, we need to go to the alt proteins. Okay, so that's great. But the problem is there wasn't the context of a larger opportunity. So they came to us to help them identify the larger opportunity. And there's a lot of toggling that happens. And I'm going to give another example of toggling, but it's not a sequence. You don't just define the opportunity and then say, okay, now that I've got the opportunity clear, now I can come up with some ideas. It's a lot of toggling back and forth because on the one hand, the technology enables things. It allows us to get places like, oh, if we could get this dairy protein, we could totally change how infant formula is done. Or if we could get this heme that's done in a different way, or we could get some other, protein that could go into cheese, we could really do different things. So part of it is like the idea is an inspiration for new opportunities, but on the other hand, the opportunity is the bigger place to play. And so we did quite a bit of work with them that we'll be talking about here in a bit, but things like, where do consumers really feel like there's needs? I did a lot of consumer insight. Are they loving some of the milk alternatives? Are they happy with, a plant-based yogurt or a plant-based ice cream or the plant-based cheeses that are out there, or even the milk alternatives? And so really understanding where the consumer was ready to bite was a big part of then directing them back to, well, gee, if I have this technology from Ginkgo, I could probably go in a lot of different proteins. That's going to direct me back. It's typically not where people start. And I was working with, awesome people, but we oftentimes get so excited about that one protein we're going to create through this fermentation process. And therefore it puts lenses on us about where those opportunities are versus also going back out and just saying like, I get it, but I can't actually make consumers eat this stuff, right? And one of the rate limiting factors we have right now is that the number of vegans and vegetarians isn't growing a lot. The number of flexitarians is growing, and the number of meals that people are having without a traditional meat in the center of the plate is growing. But the number of vegans and vegetarians is really slow. And you can look at all kinds of data, but it's a slow march. So that means that either we're going to take share from somebody else, we're going to create an all new product form, which was also one of the things that we explored. Could it be like the next product form, like a tofu we've never seen before? Or are we, are we going to take share? Are we going to grow it? Or are we going to somehow create a value proposition that's going to be really attractive to flexitarians? So that was what some of the work that we did on the opportunity. Now, as an example, I don't know if you've worked with Sherwin-Williams a ton. So why don't you tell them your Sherwin story?
Kind of stepping back outside of the industry to give you some examples from others. We did some training with a paint company, and we were talking through this idea versus opportunity concept. And we really wanted to kind of make sure that, everybody was really speaking the same language and understanding kind of the concept and the difference. And so we asked and we said, give us an example of an idea. And this is paint that goes on your walls. Somebody spoke up and they said nail polish. Now we say there are no bad ideas. That wasn't the best idea, but we kind of said why. So, everybody's kind of wondering, and we're like, okay, nail polish. I don't know that I want to go to Home Depot to buy my nail polish, but tell us why. So we're thinking all of that in our heads, but we're asking the question. And the gentleman that stood up and said nail polish actually had some really, really deep insight. He said, we are the premier experts in color, but we are not engaging with the audience until they own their first home and they buy their first wall. Like they paint that first wall that they own. We should engage younger and get our brand out there and really drive that brand recognition and that relationship with consumers at a much younger age. Color is inspiring. People love color. They're using it in all new ways. There's increasing color runs, kids are using temporary dyes, everybody's wanting to show their personality through color. Why are we not tapping into that? And when he started to say all of that, we identified the larger opportunity. That opportunity, when you step back, is actually around engaging a younger audience in the brand and decorating with color. When you articulate it that way, you can then put ideas against it. And so you say, okay, if we make that the opportunity, what ideas do we have? And honestly, the room erupted with like amazing ideas that were much more in line with the brand and the capabilities that the organization had, like celebrity partnerships, or, when do you pick a color? You pick it when you're picking your bedding. So can we do partnerships with like a PB teen, or, let's make it easy and not permanent and do wall decals and coverings. And so by not dismissing the idea, but by digging a little bit deeper into the why behind it, we were able to really understand and articulate the opportunity, which then allowed us to toggle back to the ideas and get to ideas that were much richer, much broader, much bigger, and more successful.
I love that story because I think it illustrates like what we did with Motif. Like we started with a technology and some real, like a lot of passion around some particular areas that they could go, but then stepping back more broadly and looking at like the bigger opportunities, where were those opportunities, and then folding it back, it really informed which ideas they should pursue. And I know everybody has, like a lot of choices. You've got some really powerful technologies that can go in a lot of different directions. And I was just at Future Food Tech and I was eating these pot stickers that are just amazing and phenomenal. And it's interesting. So a person with a technology chose to go in that direction, right? Which is an interesting choice. And I thought, great choice, great product. But that is a choice amongst a million different possible places that you could play. So the question is like, how we identified that larger opportunity, that larger need. So toggling between those opportunities and those ideas tends to make both bigger. And so that's just a muscle. We want you guys to develop that muscle of being comfortable with saying, okay, this is an idea. It's this thing we can make. This is an opportunity. It's this bigger market need. Let's jump back and forth. And some people are very idea centric, and other people, they're kind of bottom up thinkers, and others are really opportunity centric. They're big picture thinkers. But we really need both. And what's interesting too is that a lot of times, the inventors are the idea people, the investors are the opportunity people. And so we're sometimes have a struggle to get our message across to those investors, but it's not because they don't love our ideas, and that we can walk away feeling like they're just not getting it, right? But on the other hand, maybe we aren't speaking their language, like their language is opportunities, our language is ideas. So learning to toggle is just such a great discipline. So the next thing is, okay, what the heck's a definition? Okay, Brittany, what's the definition of an opportunity?
I feel like that's a trick question because I know ours. So, well, I mean, if I was a marketing person, I might say that it's the market. It's the needs that we're solving for, right? We've talked about that already. Like, what's that larger market need? We use that language quite often of kind of, meeting the needs of consumers. So market needs.
You think? I don't know. I'm going to go with something different. So opportunity, where does it come from? It comes from the word port. And so what's fun about this is it's Latin and it means into port. So now forever on the rest of your lives, you're going to see the word port in there. And it's kind of a trick question, right? So everybody tends to think it's the port, right? It's the market where the need is. And in fact, that's actually how a lot of people define it. Like you just said, trick question, trick answer. But it wasn't just the port. When they were thinking about getting into port, this was late 1300s, all these new trade routes were opening up. They actually were inventing new boats, they were inventing new navigation tools, and they're inventing new things that went on boats. And it was actually a really interesting time in the food industry because a lot of food and flavors were moving around the world. It's one of the biggest times of innovation in food industry, particularly in flavor and ingredients, chocolate and coffee and spices and, everything, even things that we associate with one country now usually started in a different country. So first we're going to start with the port. That's what people would say. They'd say, port two as they approach the port. But they're also announcing the ship. Like we have these value propositions on the ship. These are the products. These are the things you make in the lab and in your fermentation tanks and so forth. These are the value propositions we're taking to market. But the thing that they were actually referring to was the conditions. And that was the tide and the wind that allowed the boat to make it the final mile into port, because without that tide and wind conditions, the two wouldn't unite. And this illustrates just a really big challenge that we're all faced with is you have value propositions that are phenomenal. You're working on those. They're getting better every day. There are needs in the market. We all know that. And those needs are not just in the market, they're in the world, right? They're in the environment. They're due to climate change. We have needs for as a pop, the human beings of the universe here need the planet to survive.
Your own organization has needs,
Yeah,
profit margins and
money, funding.
investing.
Yeah, exactly. So
Capability.
needs don't just have to be in the market. So we got a bunch of needs, we've got a bunch of ways of creating value. And then we've got the conditions. And unfortunately, right now, the conditions are a lot of headwinds. They're not tailwinds. And so the headwinds have been things like the economy, things like flattening out. And we'll talk about, what's happened with expectations regarding alt meat and then where we are. But the conditions are kind of what can sometimes trip us up and also what we can end up missing. So I want to talk about all three elements and really talk about each of these. So we can see that the conditions from a sustainability standpoint are extreme. We need to, if people don't believe that, we're constantly in that battle of trying to teach people to think about, our carbon footprint and what's happening with, cows and so forth, and how we need to change, as well as what's happening with just animals in general and welfare. There's specific technologies, cultivated meat, fermentation, cellular ag. There's, all proteins from plant-based foods and so forth. And then there's a bunch of needs, and those needs actually go across a series of different demographics. We talked about internal needs. We've talked about the needs of the environment, but we have needs in particular segments: vegans, vegetarians, flexitarians, and then people with dietary restrictions. Okay, so we have all of that to kind of put together. And the question is, can you articulate those? So if you just took a piece of paper, you had 3 columns, and you said, what are our needs? What are our value propositions? What are our conditions? I believe you have a lot of that stuff in your heads, but I also know that on any given day, you'll be thinking about one and not another. And so I'd encourage you guys to just get that down. We're creating a canvas right now. So if you want access to our canvas, shoot us a note. Now, next question, does the value proposition match the consumer needs? And so that is a really big issue, because we've got to match the value proposition and the consumer needs in the right timing. And so I want to give you kind of a deeper analysis of these 3 elements. So I want to give you an example of timing, and timing has a lot to do with conditions. So we think of an idea before it's time. Procter & Gamble came out with this really interesting product, and the focus of it was to eliminate foodborne illness. And the trends that were happening was consumers were eating more vegetables, more fresh, less processed, all really good things, but there actually ended up being more foodborne illness that was being carried by these vegetables. So they created this interesting value proposition. It sounds gross when I say the word surfactant, but it was an edible surfactant with a great scent. And it was all edible, right? And it was going to wash these. It was a vegetable wash. The problem was the conditions. The retailers disliked the implication that they were selling dirty vegetables. And so this was a broader condition that was in the channel that was really a problem. As a result, what the retailer wanted to do was they wanted to go and put this vegetable wash in the detergent aisle. And putting it in the detergent aisle is just going to get lost. They didn't want it in the vegetable section. They went in the detergent aisle. That's a problem. What happened? Well, the first thing was e-commerce. So then we don't really care what aisle of the store it's in. So e-commerce first kind of unlocked that we could start selling it there. Second thing that happened though was COVID. And I'll never forget walking through the grocery store, height of COVID, masked up, scared of everything, wondering whether I needed to leave my packages out on the front step for a few days to have germs die, that very early stage of the COVID. And what's in the vegetable section? This product. Why? Because the conditions changed, right? So one of the challenges we often have as inventors, and a lot of my pals that have started companies and done really well, and those that have started companies and have struggled, have often found that they're so intent on the value proposition and how it matches up with the need that they're not always aware of some of those other conditions.
Another challenge can be that you've got a great value proposition, but you're not articulating it. So when you're putting out to consumers, you think that they're really interested in sustainability, but when push comes to shove and they're paying with their wallets, they're choosing the less expensive option. So it's really about marrying up the right value proposition with the language where the consumers
Right,
will
storytelling.
understand. Yeah, so storytelling becomes a huge part of that, right? So really understanding the needs and then being able to articulate how your value proposition meets the needs that they care about most.
Yeah. So let's unpack each of these. I love that. So let's unpack each of these and just talk about, like, first, let's look at your value propositions. Are there ways to expand it? So one thing that we do is just a fun exercise is we actually just step back and sometimes because we fall in love with an idea. Let's say, by the way, I love the pot stickers, but I'm just going to pick on them for just a second because they're so amazing. But let's say I fall in love with that pot sticker and I'm like, that is the idea. And let's say I'm not even commercial yet, right? I'm like, that's the idea. That's where we need to go. We can put, an alt protein pork in there. It's going to taste great, which it does. And there, I'm going to sit in the frozen section and that's it. So one thing we do is just say, let's go across the aisles. Let's just imagine for a second that my product was in each of these different aisles. It's in the international food. It's in beauty. I know that's weird, but it's always stretching thinking. It's in desserts, it's in something indulgent, it's in the deli area, it's in prepared foods, it's over in frozen, it's in alcohol, it's in pairings with alcohol. Let's go through and just think about, like, what would it look like if it was in each of these different things? And that alone is one way to just help us walk back from the idea for just a minute and think more broadly about our value propositions. And you may not think we like ideation. We love ideation. Remember, we want to toggle. So we want to expand. The other thing is dimensions. And if you get my book, you'll read about dimensions. And it's a really cool, simple, very simple straight line tool. But it says, let's stretch our thinking. So we tend to think, okay, this is going to be a healthier option or a more sustainable option. Well, what happens if I decide to make it more indulgent? There's actually, what is that new yogurt?
Kalina is a very indulgent yogurt. So alternative, like completely dairy free, but it's high in fat. It is you wouldn't want to eat it every day. Well, maybe you would, but if you're on a diet.
Yeah, what are some of the flavors? Like a
bourbon vanilla. Like they've got a great unlock on some of their flavors as well.
Yeah.
So, but it's meant to be an indulgence.
Yeah.
Right. And
which is awesome. Like, that's a very exciting place to play. Is it an alternative to what I'm having? Is it a replacement? Is it something I'm expecting to have every day? Am I targeting another dimension? Could be, am I targeting vegans through to flexitarians? Clean versus complex. Now that's a really interesting one. Okay, so what's one of the cleaner brands? We were talking about it the other day.
Haagen-Dazs is my favorite because I eat it every night. And
Yes.
I recognize all the ingredients right there. It's like 5 ingredients on the pack. I recognize everyone.
And they really spearhead it. Sometimes we don't want to necessarily take a lesson from, people that are in the animal protein space, but they really spearheaded that short ingredient list. And then you see it in Food RX, right? Where they have like the 3 or 4 ingredients listed on the label. It's an egg and it's some dates and it's some nuts, right? And so you've got it right there. And so that's a very clean, short ingredient list. One of the challenges that some of the things like Impossible have faced is people are really excited about it at first. And they think it's going to be a lot like a veggie burger, like I'm going to be able to recognize the ingredients, and they get in there like, I don't recognize any of these ingredients, or just a very limited number of ingredients. And so that really complex label is at loggerheads with the idea of a clean label, a simple label. And here, oftentimes we're targeting the same people. So it's the same person that wants an alt protein, but is also looking for short ingredient lists and less processed in every other moment of their lives. So it's a real tension there. Is like, how do we provide these really great experiences that are alt protein, but also have this kind of cleaner, shorter ingredient list? And some companies will choose to play in one space versus another. They're choices. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's just that these things are at tension. And so if you can visualize your tensions and your dimensions, it actually will help you stretch. What it does too is it helps you kind of think like, where could I be along each of these? Okay, the next one I want to talk about is this consumer need area. And this I think is really fascinating. So we did a bunch of consumer insight work on, alt milk products. So like yogurt, milk, ice cream, cheese, and as well as meats. We did meats as well. And then, so just drinkable milk, cheese, ice cream, yogurt. Okay, super interesting. Now, if you go out and you go, you look at any of the kind of documents that are out there, GFI has got some of these great documents as well. You'll see that why people buy the first time is different from why they buy the second time. And I think we all know that repeat purchase is one of the biggest hurdles to get over. And so why they buy the first time, they're excited, they want to try something new, they want to be responsible. Why don't they buy the next time? And it's the experience. Like they want to buy for the right reasons, oftentimes for ethical reasons, or for dietary reasons or beliefs, religious beliefs. It could be for a lot of different reasons that they're buying, which is one of the challenge, but they'll buy the first time. Why don't they buy the second time? Sometimes it's price, for sure. They're like, well, this was great, but I just can't really justify this every day. Like I can't really afford this, like meat's already expensive and then this is more expensive, or this is so much more expensive than my daily yogurt. Like I just can't justify that.
Or my teenage son drinks a gallon of milk
Yeah.
every week and I don't want him touching my almond milk. So I'm going to have multiple types of milk in my fridge because this is mine and this is for the rest of the family.
Yeah, that was actually a really great insight that they said. They were like, they would sequester their alt milks, like they would sequester their plant-based milks. And they were like, these are not for the family. The other really interesting insight was that a lot of people were buying things for their kids. Like they would say, I'll make the sacrifice, I'll eat the junk, I'll eat, Cheetos or whatever. And I'm going to go get this for my kids because this is healthier and I want them to be healthy. And so that was a really interesting dynamic as well. What we found was texture, taste. Those are some of the biggest things, right? And sometimes taste was getting there. Like we can work on taste with flavorings and things like that. Texture is a little bit harder to get there on. Consistency, mouthfeel, some of those things. Taste is also definitely an issue. We also saw that positioning was a big issue. So don't call it yogurt. Some people were like, I eat this every day, but I don't think of this as yogurt. This doesn't taste like yogurt. So can we stop calling it yogurt? So
Standard of identity.
Yeah, the standard of identity is super interesting. Like, don't call it yogurt, don't call it cheese. You can't call it cheese anyway, but don't call it yogurt. Don't try to make people believe it's something. Now with cheese, we do need it to be cheese because people want that functionality. The other thing that we saw was that people would, they would change their values, they cheat for really indulgent things. So like they were more willing to say, yeah, I'll go and get the plant-based yogurt or the milks, but ice cream, I'm just gonna suffer through it. And a lot of people were going in the milk space are going towards these alt milks more for digestion reasons. So lactose intolerance was a really big reason why people were going in that direction. And so I think the other thing that tends to happen is a lot of times the founders of companies have a very deep belief system on what's right and wrong. Like they're really like have a deep belief system. And the problem is they're marketing people that don't share that belief system. So they're marketing to people. I might have a deep belief system that causes me to do an alternative cheese. And I feel very strongly about not ruining the earth, which a bunch of cows, right? And I'm very, very passionate about that. And I know all the statistics and everything, but I'm selling to somebody who's buying it because of lactose intolerance and they don't share that value. And so the reasons why people are buying are extremely fragmented. Whereas in other categories, like the reason people buy cereal is just not that fragmented. Right? The reason that they buy alternative proteins is very fragmented and it does make it tough. But anyway, so I think the big thing I encourage here is just, really getting your head around, one, the changing conditions. So we saw that with the vegetable wash story, and we know that there's changing conditions now. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Thinking about the value propositions more creatively, stretching our thinking on that, and then thinking about our needs by actually going and talking to the consumers and the customers. Now, one thing we didn't say on the changing conditions, and I think you all know, is we have seen obviously this very big hype curve. I don't want to, it sounds very negative to call it a hype curve, but if you look at Gartner has a wonderful hype curve where they show that anything, whether it's 3D printing, when 3D printing first took off, everybody was predicting that everybody was going to have a 3D printer at home. It was going to make everything from my clothes to my, grilled cheese sandwich. And not lying, like we were going to have 3D printers for everything. I don't know where we're getting all the capsules of all the different things, but we were going to make all our food there. We were going to wear the clothing there, everything. So that's 3D printing. Same thing with alternative meats, huge hype curve, massive amounts of investment. And if you think that investors are logical, you're wrong. Highly, highly emotional. They may look at the things, but there's just a lot of emotion and a lot of like riding that hype curve. Now that hype curve kind of comes up it swoops down into like this valley of despair, and then it comes up and it starts to level off. We're a little in that valley at the moment where it's come up, and now people are pulling back with funding. It's harder to get funding. We are going to level out. One of the challenges, though, is that at the same time that curve is happening, if you look at the growth of vegans and vegetarians, it's like this. You're not seeing that grow and dip and move all over the place. You're seeing it's kind of going like this and not a lot of slope to that line. Flexitarians, yes, flexitarian meals, not the number per se number, but also just the number of meals that are not meat-based, increasing. Wonderful, very happy about that. And I'm happy about it personally. But we're not seeing the growth. And so because we're not seeing the growth, there's not a lot to support that big hype, right? So where's that big hype going to come from if we're not seeing the growth? Because we can't get, like, we're all going to be fighting for a share of wallet with those vegetarians and vegans. Okay, so all that said, what we're trying to do is just stretch your thinking, like, be sure you know your ideas, be sure you know the difference between opportunity. When you sit down and you look at your opportunity, look at your needs, look at your value propositions, look at your conditions, and then take some time to stretch thinking on them, which is fun. I mean, that part's really fun. Going out, talking to the consumers, looking at that store, thinking about how far you can go, talking to grocers, those kinds of things. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about, and I'm hoping you guys are going to have lots of questions and you're going to bug us and ask us lots of hard things. The next thing is around the levels of opportunity. And so we talk about opportunity as if it's just this solitary thing, but actually they exist at lots of different levels.
Yeah. So just like that pond, right? You've got all of these maybe little stepping stones in your pond. So this is a framework that we use. It's called our opportunity middleware, and it just is a visual tool to help us see that you can have a very, very large area of opportunity, but then you can, there's pieces, the spaces and the platforms, the purple and the yellow, before you get down to ideas. And a lot of times, we see this in big organizations a lot, they will put out kind of a statement like, sustainability, Pam.
Yes.
We want to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
And that's the directive. But there's no like roadmap for what they're trying to do. There's no way to say like this idea versus this idea is going to win out. And so the organization's been given this directive of sustainability, and each individual person's like, well, we could do something around, carbon sequestration, or we could do something around reducing our water usage, or let's think of our products and create more sustainable packaging. And all of those fit within that opportunity territory, within that green thing. But they're all, individual ideas. And what you lose on that is you can't get as much cohesion, and you can't get as much, bang for your buck, because everybody's off doing these little one-offs. So you're not seeing the results in a bigger way. What we need to do is we need to step back and say, okay, what within sustainability are we talking about? And so you can kind of say like an opportunity space might be, circular, looking at the product, cradle to grave. And there's a lot of things you could do there. You could do, that's where sustainable packaging could go, or end of life could go there. Like, can we pull something back? That is a very different opportunity and gets you to very different ideas than if you're looking at your manufacturing plants and how can you, reduce your carbon footprint as an organization. Those ideas are going to be very different. So what we want to do is identify that larger opportunity, but then break it down. There's different needs that you're solving within each of those. And there's different value propositions that you could use. And the conditions are going to tell us which one's right for now and which one's a little bit down the road. And we want to keep an eye on, we want to develop things for, but we don't want to maybe launch yet because it's not going to be supported in the market.
Yeah, and I'm jumping real quick. So here's one of the things that tends to happen in companies, and it's not unique to startups, but it does happen a lot with startups, is you have so many ideas, you don't know which to focus on. And I struggle with that in just even running my business, just so many different ideas, I don't know which to focus on. But if you can create a middleware where you can see what those ideas are and what opportunity spaces they ladder up to, and instead of evaluating every single idea, whether or not it's the right idea or not, evaluating the spaces and deciding whether they're the right spaces, that's a really powerful approach. So getting clarity on that and deciding, like in that pork example with the pot stickers, let's say I really believe I can do this kind of alt pork. A lot of different places that pork goes, right? As an ingredient, as a main center of the, center of the plate, it can be in frozen, it can be in fresh. I mean, it can be in so many different places. And so if that's where I'm really going, then just helping structure this, using this as a way of basically laying out all the different ideas. That way, as my staff come to me with ideas, I kind of know where to put them. They don't distract me. I don't have to all of a sudden be like, oh my gosh, that's a great opportunity. Let me go after it. So, allowing you to do that roadmap, I think is really, really powerful.
And one challenge we see with a lot of startups is they do have a technology that's really exciting, but they don't know where to play next. And there's so much opportunity out in the world that they're like, where do we go? So they're overwhelmed with choice. And so stepping back and identifying those needs and the values and the conditions and pulling them together and creating your kind of framework allows you to say like, okay, this is the progression. This is our roadmap for how we're going to grow, which then becomes a great story you can tell your investors.
I love that. We did this with Harley Davidson. They brought us in to help them with electrification, and they had done one electric vehicle called Livewire, and just one, and they were like, I don't know what to do next. And so we helped build out like, what is that overall opportunity middleware for electrification for Harley? Where can it help with your core products? Where can it be new products? They've actually spun it out as its own business as a result of this. And the reason is because they needed that story, which we help them build, to then get that better story for investors. So, and it does tend to really unite all of those different technologies and categories and brands. So let's maybe give this as an example.
Yeah. So all of you on the phone are in this space, right? Alternative protein. If we looked at that as one of the big green things, right? It's the territory.
Big opportunity territory.
It's the overarching broad thing that's brought us all together. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of reasons, individual reasons that everybody on this call had entered the space. Maybe it's a health swap, better for me, or like I'm intolerant and I want a solution, or maybe it's environmental concerns around water scarcity and CO2 reduction and our impact on the planet. It could be that you have a technology around an analog experience where you're improving tastes or functionality of a product. Maybe animal welfare is what brought you in, or food security and access, being able to feed more of the world, knowing that.
Even food safety.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a big deal.
So
food safety is such a big deal.
All of those, and that's a mix of conditions and needs and value. And right now it's just kind of a hodgepodge of all those different things that have brought all of us together in this space, but maybe we don't have clear, kind of a clear direction. So depending on which kind of what brought you in, you can start to map out your middleware. So if we put alternative proteins at the top and we said, we're going to look at really health swaps, when people are changing out what they're eating for something else, and there's so many needs in this space, and there are a ton of different reasons why they could do it, right? Intolerance, because you've got an allergy, you're just trying to be a little bit healthier, you want more protein in your diet. So even within, this idea of health swaps, you could have, your platforms are very different. The needs for each one can be very unique and different. Yeah. Your value proposition, your technology might apply to multiples of these.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right. It doesn't have to be just one.
Yeah. But when you toggle, again, that toggling, you can say like, what would some ideas be? If I asked myself, how to do more protein forward, what could some of those solutions be? What could be that we're going to, fermentation is a way to do that, or microprotein is another way to do that. And you see examples of these with products today, like Horn and Perfect Day and Meaty. They're meeting the needs of consumers kind of in this space, looking for one of these pieces. A different example would be maybe an analog experience. Like I want something that is the same as, like, I don't want to be able to tell that I'm not eating meat. I think, Impossible with Heme is a great example of really bringing that to light in the market of like, that's kind of something that they really played on and put out in their marketing. But it could be, is it taste? Is it, are you focusing on like, it needs to taste the same? Are you looking at it needs to function the same? We see a lot here, like there's challenges with baking, right? Like the alts don't function the same way when you bake it because there's these different challenges. We talked about standard of identity earlier. Like, are there places where standard of identity is important, or are there places where you could get away with something very different that's maybe not called a yogurt, right? A Greek yogurt, I think, was the example that they gave us. They're like, I love my Greek yogurt, but it doesn't taste the same.
Example, though, because there was a time, and I just want to challenge that too. There was a time when we didn't know what Greek yogurt was. And if you just first said to me Greek yogurt, I'd go, I don't know what that is, right? I eat yogurt. There was a time I didn't know what tofu was, right? So then you know what tofu was. There was a time, you know, so there's times when we're like, oh, that's an interesting food form. And I do think that that's a really interesting area, is like this notion of we have to create this analog experience versus we can actually say, no, we're not going to create an analog experience. We're going to create a true to its own identity experience. And I think you see that now we're going in that direction more, but whether it's a dip or a pate or it's a, you know, whatever it is, those are all kind of their own forms. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to just saying it's not this,
Yeah.
but it's delightful.
Yeah. So you can use this and kind of, these are just two examples of how, you know, you can enter in different ways. You can pull together different needs and pair them with your value proposition with different conditions, and you can create or identify these potential different opportunity areas of which maybe your technology is a benefit, but maybe it's a different messaging or a different story, like that you're meeting the different needs. So you have to change, you know, that brand expression slightly in the story that you're telling.
And I think it's really helpful too, because like to your point, a lot of times we're so intent on getting that hero product out, that first one that our investors fell in love with, and we got it out. And then we're like, oh, what's next? Is it sausage? Is it what? What are we doing next? Exactly. And they all look like good ideas, but it's sometimes because we haven't anchored it back to what's the larger opportunity. I don't know if you've ever watched like a sequel to something and you were mad because they didn't quite get it right. You're like, they missed the good thing in the first one. They missed like the heart of the first one. And I think sometimes we don't know the heart of why we've succeeded. And that heart is what we need to kind of build off of. It's what tells us whether it's pork or chicken next. So we're going to go back to that Post-it note example real quick. And just this is fun, is just to see like this type of thinking helps big companies. So they did Post-it notes. They know Post-it notes. They made plenty of money on all of us people coming up with ideas, right? Well, where did they go after that? Well, instead of saying my big green territory is a Post-it note, my big green territory isn't the thing I make. My big green territory is the benefit I created. And we'll just for now say it's removable adhesive. Okay, and then I could start saying, well, where else could I use a removable adhesive, in office or home? And then I've got Post-it notes. It's great. But we could also have removable whiteboards, which we do have in my office, right? They're these gigantic things that are half the size of your wall that you kind of peel on and roll on, and you got a whiteboard. And then with Post-its themselves, you can expand out to a million. I think we own every million different size. We even have like a cabinet just for Post-it notes, right? And so you can expand on color, size, even strength of the adhesive. Like the thing on the whiteboard is not as, I don't know, unsticky. It's much stickier than the Post-it note itself. And then at home, what's really fun here is how they took this notion of removable adhesive out to a bunch of other problems. They said, I have this removable adhesive. Now that's a value proposition. That's a tech push, right? But then they looked for all these places where I don't want something permanent, right? I don't want painter's tape on my wall permanently. I don't want to have to always have that there. I want to be able to peel it off. I don't want hooks on my wall. I don't want holes. I don't want holes in my wall. So what they did was, it was tech push. And that's why I love this example for you guys, is you might be like, I don't care about Post-it notes. You do care about Post-it notes, because this is such a powerful example of saying tech push, absolutely tech push, but then going outside of my tech push and thinking about where are pain points associated with things that I don't want there permanently. And they continue to grow the list of places where you don't want things permanently. It's quite impressive. Okay, so curious for you guys is, where can the middleware really help you all? Could it help you get to a roadmap? Would it help you expand your thinking on your opportunities? So that's really, kind of where we've gotten to, which is we've covered ideas versus opportunities. We've covered that opportunity definition. So just reminder, opportunity is the thing you're making. That's the idea. The opportunity is the bigger need and conditions and so forth that make it at the right time. That opportunity definition comes from the word port, right? Port, we're going to see the word port in there. And it's the port with the needs, the boat with the value proposition, and the wind and the tide, which are the conditions that get it to market. And then the third principle is those levels of opportunity, is that I need to kind of create a hierarchy so that I can kind of put some things closer to near in, and I can put other things farther out so I can get to a roadmap. And so really, this is really meant to help you think about your growth journey and get it kind of more dialed in. But then we also have to turn it into action. And so we aren't just interested in sitting around thinking, we really need to turn these thoughts into actions. And we get there once we do that middleware, once we get that hierarchy. It's a little go slow to go fast. Like, let's go sit down, make sure we've got our need value conditions, and let's sure we've got our hierarchy. Then let's get our roadmap, and then let's start moving so that we don't have to keep debating what's next, because we know the needs and the conditions that we're laddering up to. So that is what we have to share today. We would absolutely love some tough questions and some easy questions thrown in there. So any thoughts or questions from you guys? I'm from upstate New York, so everybody's a guy, sorry.
Thank you so much, Pam and Brittany, for that great presentation. You had wonderful energy throughout. It was really fun to watch and listen to it. And reminder everyone, if you have questions, submit them through the Q&A box. That helps us keep track of them a bit more easily. And while we were talking before the seminar began, Pam did say that she really likes those hard questions. So feel
Like a
free to
challenge.
send them, send them her way. So we do have, I don't know if this is a question, but just maybe an observation about alt proteins potentially being in that trough of disillusionment or in relation to the Gartner hype cycle. Could you speak a little bit about that and how you would view where we are in terms of that hype cycle in relation to your opportunity thinking metrics?
Yeah, I do think we are in a little bit of a trough. And it's partially just because of what a great job you guys did. I'm sorry, but you did such a great job creating excitement with so many new technologies. It's kind of all of our faults. We're creating a great, boom of investment money. Now, part of that boom of investment money isn't just for alt proteins. Part of it is also the fact that the investors are not seeing a lot of good innovation come out of the big food companies. And so they are relying more on small companies. And so sometimes we need to understand some of the other conditions. That's a good condition for smaller companies because that hasn't changed. Like, the big companies aren't terribly successful at innovation. Some of them are, but at innovating in healthier areas, it tends to be a little bit of a slow grow. That condition hasn't changed. The money is still out there. It is going to have to go somewhere. But the problem is we're going to have to show growth. Now, this is where I'm going to say some things that are going to be sacrilegious. Okay, so we're all prepared for a little sacrilegious stuff.
We're ready. We're prepared.
This might be the last time you guys talk to me, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the fundamental problem is that flat line of vegetarians and vegans not growing very fast, and flexitarianism is growing, especially as people understand more. And I'll tell you, one of the ways it's growing, by the way, is children coming home from school, smack talking cows, right? We have a lot of kids in schools that are hearing the truth, and they're coming home and they're talking to their moms and dads, and the kids are actually influencing the parents. We are seeing that more and more. We see that in our consumer insight. They're like, I have to buy this because my kid is like shaming me.
Yeah, the whole family is going vegetarian or vegan because my daughter, convinced us.
Watch that, that one documentary about McDonald's. Yes. So yeah, exactly. Like, the whole family is going vegetarian or vegan. And I've talked to a lot of executives that are like, yeah, I'm vegan. And sometimes they're like, yeah, I don't want to be, but I am. And I have been for 10 years because of my daughter. And very interesting dynamic. So that dynamic is good and continuing. So that put one in the win column, put one in the hope column. But those little people have to grow up, and they have to influence, they're influencing their parents. They've got to influence their boyfriends and girlfriends. There's influence that's happening, but it isn't the kind of influence that grows as quickly as the investment money. Right. So we have this kind of disconnect between investment money going crazy, because you guys have done a great job of exciting the world with your technologies, but population change and behavior change very slow. We also see, just in general, this is not unique to this space, behavior change is slow. It tends to be slow, particularly with food. Food is deeply cultural. It's deeply embedded in what we grew up with. Our taste, sensing, and everything is different. Yeah, cultural change differences, food wed to culture. You guys know all this, but those things don't change quickly. Some things change quickly, like all of a sudden Starbucks shows up, and when we go from, okay, I'm gonna date myself. When I was a kid and you said coffee shop, I was thinking this really gross diner, And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll sit down and have like a pretty cup and everything. Is very different experience. It wasn't a $9 cup of coffee. It was like a 50-cent cup of coffee. So some things do change quickly with retail, but it is unusual for that to happen. Okay, so if I believe that we're in a bit of a trough, how much of a trough, I don't know, but why has that happened? Because we had investment going here and we had behaviors and population going here. So that's a problem. Then where does my sacrilegious comment come in? And that is that I personally think that there's more opportunity for hybrids. I know that's like, what? Okay, and I know you might be like, please get out of here, you sacrilegious person. But I do believe that there are places for hybrids, not as much in milk, interestingly. And the reason why not in milk, because so many people are choosing non-dairy for lactose reasons, digestibility. And so the notion of a hybrid, which I went into the consumer insight work thinking, oh, hybrids, yes, and came out being like, that is not going to work in milk. That will not work in milk. So that's a really interesting thing.
But
Meat is a different story. So is there more opportunity for hybrid? There might be. Okay, now why is that? Because if I can tell.
Just a quick interruption of clarification. We have someone asking if by hybrids you mean plant-based meat and cultivated meat together, or do you mean traditional, conventional meat from animals?
I'm so sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes,
there was
it's a great question. And I'll tell you why. Now, I don't know that I'm right. I don't know that I'm right, but I do think that with the data shows, and it's GFI has this data. You can get on the website and you can see these great reports. Why are people not buying the second time? Taste, texture, right? And price point. Okay, so how do we affect taste, texture, and price point? You know, it's going to have to be something. And if we can't get there with alternative proteins, which would be my preference, then if there's a way to draw more flexitarians into this world, can we look at hitting it from both sides? And that's my main thing is like, I need, just look at this practically from a business standpoint is I want to see that line increase faster, that line of flexitarian eating occasions, not a person, but the flexitarian eating occasions. And the other line I want to see is I want to see a reduction of animal proteins. So how do I get a reduction of animal proteins and I get an increase of flexitarian eating occasions, you know, like, then the answer might be hybrid. So we are going to have to think pragmatically. And I think that that's what tends to happen on the other side of that curve is there's a pragmatism that comes into place. And that replaces the hype. And so now pragmatically 3D printing is happening. It's great. It just isn't in my house making my clothes. It's in industrial places and it's being used to create products that couldn't be created otherwise. So I'm not a big proponent of just, you know, a traditional protein and an all protein per se. Now, the other question though that was asked was, am I talking about a hybrid between technologies? And I am absolutely talking about that because I believe that when you look at, I'm just going to talk about long ingredient lists for half a second here. Let's go get a jar of whatever off the shelf. I don't know, thought about mayonnaise or something. A lot of ingredients, a lot more ingredients than if I just made it at home. I just throw an egg and some oil in the blender and make some mayonnaise. But you know, when I get it in the store, it's got a bunch of ingredients. Why is that? Shelf stability, sure, I'll give them that. But a lot of it is that they're trying to refine the taste and the texture. So if traditional food companies that have loads more experience than most of us in making good foods have to have a longer ingredients list to get to a consumer appropriate level of taste and texture and to beat out the competition, then we have to ask ourselves, do I need to combine technologies to get to the right taste and texture rather than competing with somebody else in the, you know, whether it's lab grown, plant-based, whatever it is, rather than saying, hey, which one's going to win? Usually the which one's going to win question is the wrong question to be asking. If you are asking which one's going to win, stop asking that question because the answer is most likely them all. They're all going to win and they're most likely going to come together. So if I can put plant-based proteins with lab cultured, you know, products, if I can grow, you know, put some mycelium products, if I can kind of combine all these things together in some way, that really gets at a better product. And I'm not talking like scaffolding, you have certain things you have to do, I get it. But I think that looking at combinations and then looking at the other things, like, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of ingredients out there that improve with taste and texture that we're probably gonna have to look at. And it might mean longer ingredient lists, but we've got to break the barrier of that second purchase. And that's why that line is so flat, is we're just not getting that second and third and fourth and fifth and eternal purchases.
We've got a couple more questions in
Yeah,
here.
no, that's really really interesting. I will say the blended hybrid product concept is a very interesting one. We'll actually be hosting a few roundtables about that at the Good Food Conference because we see that
Good.
emerging area of interest and innovation. And I think that might get back to a point you made earlier that I wrote down, where you said that founders often have a very deep belief system, but their market might not have that same belief system. So how do you really appeal to your market there, and thinking through these new and different ways in which you might be able to do that to still achieve your ultimate goal?
Yeah.
The next kind of big question we have here is, can ideas become opportunities?
I fully believe they can, and I think the Post-it note one is a great example. It's a tech breakthrough. So we do see tech push resulting in creating an opportunity. Like, we all needed things that weren't permanent all along. We couldn't articulate it. But the fact that they get this breakthrough technology and realize it's a breakthrough, then absolutely an idea can lead to an opportunity for sure. I see the next one, that one about the bootstrapping, which is converting that idea into that $1 billion opportunity. And so I think that the two kind of the questions go hand in hand.
Right.
Is that idea, like what 3M did to take an idea and make it a $1 billion opportunity. I think it's such a great example. And I think that's where, like, you look at what, like a capability, like what Ginkgo Bio has, they've got a capability, right? So that should be $1 billion opportunities. It's not entirely yet. It is in some places, not at others. But I think a lot of times it comes from understanding that roadmap. So you look at like what Perfect Day's done. They've done a great job of trying to get to that roadmap. Like, they're not a one-hit wonder, so, a great pot sticker needs to be a bigger platform. And I know that's their intention. Like, it's a hero idea that convinces everybody and wins their hearts. And, you couldn't get people away from that booth at Future Food Tech, right? But it's got to turn into something bigger. So having that runway, having that middleware is how you do turn a great idea into a big opportunity.
And if you go back to the definition of opportunity, right, those three parts, and really truly understand all three, that's where you're really going to turn that idea. Like, that's how you turn it into an opportunity. You step back and identify the other parts that are missing. So if you start with the technology and a value proposition, you have to go out and make sure, like, are the needs actually really there? And do the conditions support this? And the conditions could be, environmental conditions, like regulatory, and, the needs of the fact that we've got scarcity and, not as much land and drought and weather and all of these things. It could be, the market needs could be in terms of, what are consumers looking for? Individual consumers, tribes of consumers, the channel needs, there's all of these different places. So stepping back and really understanding what needs are you solving for? Yeah. And are those needs big enough? And then are the conditions around us, are the things that are changing, those trends, those unlocks in other technologies that will, benefit us, right? The iPhone example, or the Kodak example of, Kodak did the first digital camera, but it was 1973.
Yeah.
Like, nobody's pulling their TVs out of the wall. They don't,
TVs were like,
we didn't really, computers were punch cards, those sorts of things. So they shelved they understood the needs, but the surrounding conditions really weren't there yet. And the technology, the value proposition was improving. And then their challenge was that they didn't see the changing conditions and pull it back off the shelf. So a lot of times companies have ideas that have failed in the past and they've kind of shelved it. And so we always encourage people to go back and look and see, hey, did I have the right value proposition identified? Did I have the right needs identified? And were the conditions right?
It's like a postmortem, but it's actually a way to, some of you have had your hearts broken. And we don't want your hearts broken, but we get our hearts broken when we get that idea out. And a lot of times it's too early.
Yeah.
And then
I
what's
think
really frustrating is that later somebody will come in and they'll have more funding and the world will be more ready for it. And that is where a lot of our hearts get broken in being startups. And a lot of times those ideas are right, but they were right and they were too early. And so then it's really frustrating because then somebody comes in and they get hundreds of millions of dollars of funding and then they come in and you're like, that was my idea. So yeah, I do think that the timing is key. Let's look at some of the other questions. What do we got here?
Yeah, we have some here around providing nutrition, the nutritional elements of these products. But I did want to, maybe before looking at those, go back a little bit to this idea about needs and being too early. Just because that was actually a note that I jotted down, was like, what if consumers don't recognize the need? I see a lot of pitch decks, for example, that all look very familiar and that all proteins are addressing this big, how do we save the planet need? But they don't really talk about what is a consumer actually getting? What need are you solving for that person who's actually purchasing the product? And so my question is really around, like, what role does shaping consumer perceptions or influencing consumers play into this framework?
I love that question so much. I'm going to tell you a really quick story. We did some stuff with Procter & Gamble and they big, huge world global project. And one of their frustrations was they're like, hey, Kimberly-Clark beat us to Asia with their 10-cent diaper and Colgate beat us to the Americas with their sachet model. How do we get into Africa ahead of them? We're like, well, that's cool, but Africa doesn't have enough money. Rural Africa is not going to be buying like, disposable diapers or shampoo or whatever. So long story short, we actually got them into Africa, in rural Africa, through a social entrepreneurship model where women were predominantly going village to village with a van that had individual sachet model of a single diaper, a single Femhigh, single shampoo, single soap for hygiene purposes primarily. And a lot of them were life-saving. And I'm talking life-saving, like you get your kids to sleep through the night when they're having issues, and it can be life-saving. And so it was a model that allowed, it was a partnership with an NGO, with the government of Kenya, and it got them into Africa. Well, it allowed them to get their brand in front of people and to also create life-saving product purchases that people could afford. So we did change. And that was what, 15 years ago? I mean, way ahead of its time. So we did change. Now I'm going to give you an example of something I think could be interesting. And I am not like the god of insight here. But I think one thing is what parents are saying. So we did hear parents say that they would sacrifice for themselves. They'd eat bad food to give their kids better food. Now, that is somewhat at tension with the question of whether or not some of these burgers, for example, are better food, because while they might be better for the planet, the long ingredient list has been throwing people a little bit. It's not the food experience as much as in some ways long ingredient list. I believe that there are propositions out there that solve problems for parents who want their kids to be thinking properly about the planet and want to reinforce that thinking. So if we look at needs, we're always like, oh, what does it taste like? What is the nutritional value, and so forth. Let me tell you what the real need is. Parents want to raise children that are responsible. That's a need. Can we create a line of children's food products that allow us to basically say, like, it's like Kids Saving the Planet brand, and it's this really like, kids are like, Mom, I want that because I'm saving the planet. And kids influence a lot of what's going in the basket. And so I believe that there are really big needs that are not being met, that aren't necessarily about the parent understanding about carbon footprint or methane or greenhouse gases, or they're not understanding the charts, they're not reading the infographics, but they do have a kid who's coming home and saying, I don't think cows are that good. I heard cows are bad, and so where do we pick up on that need of the parents saying, you know what, that's great. I want my kid to love the planet and care for it better than I have. So I think that there are some needs there. And I'll just say real quick too, I think those needs can be met in other ways. I do just want to touch on that question around other sources of protein, like high protein pills or nuggets or chips or whatever. And that is, I don't know about those in particular. I do believe those are valuable because people are looking for protein, particularly in things like beverages and other places, but also just that openness to new forms, I think is really important.
Absolutely. I love that. And, as we're talking about consumers, someone asked, how do you go about understanding your consumer to narrow down all of your ideas? What's that process look like? What kind of journey would you recommend to someone?
Yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Well, so I think
You led
it's-
a lot of work.
Yeah, so consumer insight is one thing, and you hear a lot about voice of the customer, the consumer, and we actually take a slightly different approach. So we use voice of the ecosystem, and you are all part of that ecosystem. And so what is that? What does that mean? Well, we define the ecosystem as people who participate. So consumers have a great spot there, but also those who influence and observe. So influencers, regulatory bodies, GFI is an influencer. So they're shaping how we think, and observers, those that are kind of maybe on the peripheries that are seeing how behaviors are changing. So when we think about observers in the food space, it's cultural anthropologists that can give us insight across the board. Or a great story was a project we did with Kellogg's and kids. And Kellogg's had talked to everyone. They talked to kids, talked to parents, talked to the pediatrician, the nutritionist, but they hadn't talked to janitors, and janitors were the unlock for the school lunches because they saw everything that happened. They're like, hey, it's Apple Day. Parents are happy. School district is happy. Everybody's happy. Kids are especially happy. They've got a projectile that they can throw in this garbage can. And they walked us over and showed us this garbage can full of perfect Washington State apples, right? So who is watching? And they're like, kids want playability. They want tradability. They want fun in their food. And that inspired, a new line of products based on that. So who is around you that's kind of observing things? Who can you go to for insight that, can help see, the headwinds and the tailwinds that are coming? But then consumers themselves. When we did the work on dairy, but we expanded the consumer base. We talked to people who don't want these products and asked why they don't want these products and understood with open-ended questions. And we did blind taste tests, and people, what they say and what they do are very different. Everybody was anti-soy in that focus group. And the one that they said tasted the best and overall wanted the best was soy. So there's there's this tension because consumers say they want something and then their behaviors don't actually, line up with that, or they have all these preconceived notions. And I think it's worse now with all of the data that's and access to information and, false media that's impacting all of these. So when you can go and you can talk to them and unlock that, we talk to early adopters, those who had all of these, dietary issues, all the reasons why, and get the perspectives from around it, you can kind of understand and start to see where there's overlap.
Yeah.
And where there's the overlap is where your messaging comes in, because if you can message to that overlap, you're going to hit all of these segments and you're going to be able to get to more of the market versus if you're just, sending your message to one person, like, hey.
I do think in trying to get that line, I do think that the rate limiting factor is that line: number of vegans, number of vegetarians, number of meals that don't have protein, that don't have traditional protein in it. To work on that line, I think we have to start talking to the consumers that don't care about us right now and are like, I'm never going to give up meat. I mean, we brought those people in and we're like, what are the moments? And for a lot of them, it was milk and digestion. That was the early spot for them to start to move. And you will see, why is it that milks are the first thing? Soy milk is the very first thing that really tipped in a major way and became something that had a lot of repeat purchase. It's the first thing we see true repeat purchase on, except for things that are more for religious purposes, like the food for Seventh-day Adventists and health food stores. You saw a lot of that tip early. But at a mass market level, it was soy. And why is that? Largely because of digestion. And so if you kind of go, sometimes there's slightly more pedestrian needs than, saving the planet. But talking to eaters is a really powerful thing. The other thing I'd say is we're seeing a lot of movement right now in the influencer space. And I mean, influencers like artists and actors and so forth, developing their own brands. And so if you are fewer steps away from Kevin Bacon, I'd say use it. Maybe not him. He's got a terrible name for this project, but we've got to think about how can we get influencers?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I know we've only got a few more minutes. How do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, and I just want to say I've noticed some people exchanging their LinkedIns and their contact info in the chat. And I just want to say how awesome that is. It's really great to see folks in the GFI community connecting. So just wanted to give a little call out for that. Really, really love to see it. And then, we just have a few more minutes left. We just have some questions here, more around, I mean, I think this is such a big topic of conversation, is just the role of artificial intelligence and AI. They're asking about it in the context of hybrids and blended meat products. But maybe to zoom out a little bit, how do you see these like big, potentially hugely transformational technologies influencing something like food, which is so tangible and embedded in culture, which you mentioned earlier?
A lot of it is about how you ask the right questions. We've been working on this ourselves. Like, what are the questions that we're asking? I am very cautious, though, about whether or not, like, there's this great story about a lawyer who ended up using it to try to come up with these cases. And it turned out that all the cases it gave them were fake, that they were made up. So ChatGPT is a great storyteller. That lawyer is not in a good place right now. And so ChatGPT is a great storyteller. So I think it's a lot about, like, if you understand you have a great storyteller at your fingertips, use it to tell stories. Okay. So use it to go and ask about positioning, ask about, like, how would you position, a hybrid food? How would you position this to children? Let's go do that today and see where we get. So it's good at storytelling. It's not necessarily good at truth. And so now technically you can ask it, like, how might these things work together? And I think it can kind of imagine. It's very imaginative, in terms of creating different combinations. So I do think, like, from a technical standpoint, you can ask it technical questions. I would pay for the more advanced level if I were you. But yeah, so I think those are some of the things, but just keep in mind, it's a storyteller. It's a bit large language model. Use it for storytelling, use it for thinking, use it for. And the other thing I find is use it for ideation, but then go test those things. Like, don't use it for truth, use it for fresh thinking. We're using it, we'll be like, we might say, like, where are these opportunities? And it might say, oh yeah, this, and we're like, okay, yeah, we might have missed that one. Or yes, this confirms a few things, but it also shows us some maybe old ways of thinking. So the other thing is challenge it in the sense of realizing that sometimes it's old thinking, which with ChatGPT, it is old thinking. So the other thing I just would also mention is we are revising the book. Brittany is my co-author now, and we are looking for input from people. So we are going to be sending out a survey to folks. Anybody that participates will actually have their name in the book. We're even putting everybody's picture in the book. So it's going to make one of those big, gigantic pictures, all the little pictures that make the big picture of the port and the boat. So a fun way to celebrate the ecosystem of innovators. That's our intention here, is to have as big an ecosystem of innovators as we can. So we're looking for 500 to 1,000 people that are going to potentially contribute to the book. And we do have that survey already prepared. We haven't sent it out, but if you want to share your email or LinkedIn, we'd love to connect with you that way.
Awesome. Thank you. That sounds so exciting. And Liam, you said a question about the recording. We will be sharing a recording with everyone. So that should be sent out later today or tomorrow morning. And just quickly before we log off, how can people reach you if they want to get in touch with you to talk more about opportunity thinking? Where should they go? You can also reach out to me at GFI and I can connect you, but
sure,
folks can get in touch directly.
So yeah, we can put it in the chat if we want to, but it's just pam.henderson@NewEdge-edge.com. Or you can just do newedgeopportunity.com. It's one word, but we'll put it in there. But we'd love to chat. We're really just very excited about helping the community. We want to include the thinking of the community in the book. So we really do want to connect. So please do reach out with any questions, anything that anything that you see as a need.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, NewEdge, for joining us today. It's been really helpful, very informative. Loved all the questions today. Again, we'll send everyone a recording of the seminar. It'll be in our YouTube channel. Now you know how to get in touch with the NewEdge folks if you want to talk more about this. But thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, see you soon. Thank you so much. Thank you for including us.